guys get settled for a moment, if you don't know me, my name is Joelle Monique. You may have seen me on lots of things like Nerdist and Collider and The Hollywood Reporter, maybe Playboy. I'm a writer, culture critic, not posing, guys, just doing the writing, okay?
You know everybody is Googling right now.
Yes, get it. I'm also a huge animation nerd fan, and so it is kind of overwhelming to be sitting next to these two geniuses. You're here, I assume you know who they are, but I'm gonna give you guys a little rundown of some of my favorites. First, to my left, we got Greg. How you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing very well.
Good, excellent. You know Greg, he's done Warm on the Clone Wars. He was Oogway in Kung Fu Panda. He was Jack and Crazy Fish in SpongeBob SquarePants. Lenny from Cars. And you guys, other than Samurai Jack, my favorite, he was Uncle Iroh in Avatar The Last Airbender. What? Such a good show. Emotional performances that still to this day send me. Amazing. Phil LaMarr's played every superhero in existence. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's crazy how many voices you've done. But also, he's Hermes Conrad from Futurama, one of my favorite performers. But also, was it Reverend Preacher Bot? All of the black stereotype characters from Futurama. Deliciously.
John DiMaggio does that.
Oh, that's right. That is true. Also, Bail Organa in a lot of the Star Wars animated series, and Mouse from Mass Effect. But my favorite, again, outside of Samurai Jack, who else? In Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Amazing, incredible show, great performances. I won't make you guys wait any longer. Let's get into why we're here. It's time for Samurai Jack. Okay. So now I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna try to calm down, get it together. Okay. So tell me about when you guys first met Jack and Aku. Whether it's pictures, script, what did you guys get first from the characters?
Should we go in chronological order?
You've got more history with the show than I do.
It's not on.
We're actors. Our voices will carry.
Actually, my voice is completely shot.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
But so move up. I can't yell.
Cozy in here, guys. You've got the space.
Well, we did. Until I got shut.
This is a great costume, sir. Amazing.
Thank you.
They're on. This is on, but I cannot produce sound out of any of these. No.
Yeah. I'm not terribly technically adept, I'm afraid.
Never up. I'm gonna test it. It's on the right channel. This is on. Keeping switch on for table levels. Everything is plugged in correctly. I checked that. I can do it.
Is something hissing now? Wait, Greg,
Hello.
Whoa! Hey, you found it.
Yeah, definitely. That would be it.
Excellent. You want to tap his mic? Make sure it's on. You know,
We're
perfect.
good to go.
Cool. I will just project. I have no problem for you.
Samurai, save the day.
Okay, just to recap briefly, our question was, the first time you met Jack and Aku, what was that like for you?
It was, for me, it was the audition, the original audition for the original series in 2000 maybe? And I'm trying to remember, they might have had a character drawn, not much description. I just remember mostly being in the booth, and Gendy Tartakovsky and I think it was Colette Sunderman were there. She was the voice director, and we were just sort of massaging, you know, the voice, because he told me he's from ancient Japan. He's, you know, this very powerful samurai. He said there's not a lot of effort. Everything I did, he pulled it back, because I think we started out initially. He said, okay, he's from Japan. He's going to have a stronger accent. It's like, no, less accent. And you know, there's a lot of action. It's like, nope, he doesn't need to do that much. And that became sort of a hallmark of the series. Like, when, you know, there was so much action in that show, but if you look at the lists of efforts and grunts, far less than shows with half as much action. It's like, for Jack to jump, he just needs to jump. He doesn't have to go, there's not a lot of that. But yeah, eventually we sort of stumbled onto, not stumbled, but like massaged the voice into what I started calling a young Asian Clint Eastwood voice. You know, because it was very pulled back. It was very much no effort, very little feeling, very, you know, on point at all times, you know. And then when I got the job, I went in for the first day of recording, and this is very, very unusual. They had finished animation. Because Gendy had done something to sort of, I guess, a concept test to show Cartoon Network what he was thinking, because it was, I mean, at that point I think Ed, Ed and Eddie was their big show. So this was not the same thing. And he wanted them to get a sense of what he was going for. So he had, in the first episode, there's a fight with a bunch of Beetlebots. He basically had that battle animated already, and he played it. And I was just like, oh, this, okay, yeah, got it. You know, and I mean, which you never get in animation. Usually, you know, from the first time you record to the first time you see finished animation, it's 9 months to a year. You know, so it was really amazing, especially, and I think it was because the show was so visual. It was helpful to me to actually see, you know, what was going on. Like, oh, okay, that's why I don't have any lines. I don't need to say anything, you know.
How about you, sir? First time you met Aku?
Well, the first time I met Aku was like everyone else. I watched the show. I was watching the show. I was a fan of the show. My son, I think, was about 10 at the time, and it was a show that we both could enjoy together. And I loved watching the show. I loved listening to Mako Iwamatsu. I loved listening to Phil LaMarr, watching the show. Never dreaming, you know. My wildest dreams, I couldn't imagine that someday I would be voicing Aku. So I was literally just a fan of the show like everybody else. And I'm sorry to see it go, and I was really glad to see it come back. I think that my first day in the booth there is always a little strange for me, because there's so much baggage with me simply arriving, because you knew Mako, you worked with Mako, he was a friend. And here in walks Greg Baldwin, and I'm sort of taking over for Mako, and I'm nothing like Mako in real life, you know. You might have noticed, we're very different people. So it's always a little bit weird for me to walk in. Also, it was the same on Avatar. And the wonderful thing was that Phil made me feel so at home and so comfortable immediately. And from then on, it was just fun. It was playtime, you know. I got to voice this iconic villain. Miraculous. To have begun just watching the show and to have ended up being on the show. You know, it's a fairy tale. In some ways, I would say it is.
Aku's fairy tale.
Aku's a fairy tale, yes.
Although it's funny, because I talk to people about you quite a bit. And what I love about what you've done with Aku is you could have easily just done an impression, you know, or they could have just hired someone to do an impression. Because that's happened before.
Yeah.
You know, when Don Messick passed away, they hired a DJ who did a good Scooby-Doo impression to play the part. But it never works well. And what I love about what you're doing is you're not doing Mako, you're playing Aku.
You sort of, I mean, it's in the back of my head always that I need to also honor Mako. But that's an Aku. I don't think there's any other way to play Aku, because it's just such a wonderfully written, insane character. You know, obviously it's always in the back of my mind. I want to sound, it's not too jarring. And I don't think it was. It wasn't too jarring. But it's just such a wonderful character. You know, I honestly would have to say that of all the characters that I've ever played on stage or voiced, Aku is my favorite one, because a character like that comes along very, very rarely. And to actually have the chance to do it, it was amazing. When I knew that the show was going back into production, a friend of mine said, "Hey man, did you hear about this? Did you see this news story?" And I said, "Oh no, I didn't." Well, I guess they must have gone with someone else, you know. It was that showbiz. A couple of days later, weeks later, you know, I finally get the call, they'd like to hear you audition for it. And then a couple of weeks after that, you know, it finally announced that I was doing it. And a friend of mine said, okay, here's the thing, he texted me. You only need to know how to say 2 words as Aku, and you better get those 2 words right because it's all anybody's going to really want to hear. And those 2 words, of course, were extra thick. And that's the key to the character, I think. Extra thick.
Be a meme.
It's the key to life. The secret.
So tell me about working with Gendy. We talked about Gendy, thank you. He's got a new show coming up. I don't know if either of you have auditioned or have you seen anything about Primal. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
I saw the teaser. I did look at the teaser.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I'm really excited about it. But what's he like as a director? I mean, you spoke a little bit about, he's pulling you back. He had this like very strong idea for the character. Once you guys are locked in and you know the character, is he kind of hands off, or does he have a lot of ideas for you guys?
Gendy is one of those great directors. I mean, one, he's not just a director, he's an artist.
Yes, absolutely.
He can draw it, I mean, basically he could do all of that, except voicing, but he has such a complete vision, and this is what's key, and so it's something I found, because I've been lucky enough to work with some really, really good directors. And what I find that the best ones have in common is they have a complete vision, like a tapestry. They know every thread, but they are also open to whatever you bring that can raise the game, heighten it, add to it. Because there are some directors who, are like puppet masters. Do the thing I want you to do this way. Nope, lift your elbow, and some of them make phenomenal art. It's not fun to work under those people, But to me, the best ones are basically, they're not directors as much as they are directing artists. And artists are collaborative, especially in animation. And, Gendy's one of those people who, he was the only person I knew of back in the day. The storyboard artists were the writing staff.
Wow. Okay, that's like very commonplace now, right?
Now it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but back then you had writers and you had artists, But his show, I think he just knew, it's like, this show is visual driven. So why not have the people who are creating the images come up with the stories? And so the storyboard artists would pitch their ideas. And it was amazing. And that's, I think, part of the reason the show works on the levels it does, because some shows you can tell it's the words and the images are there to support the script, because this is about the writers. But this one, the writing, the visual images, the music, the sound effects, the colors, like all of it, all works together to tell the story.
No, I
It's all very fascinating information.
I think it was the first episode. They send you the script, and frequently they'll send you the storyboards as well, which is helpful. And I realized I was working on something very, very different when I printed out the storyboards. And I went through literally, I had to replace the ream of paper. It was like this thick. And I was like, okay, maybe I won't print storyboards next time. Because literally, it's that, literally a ream of paper. I printed it. I'm going to print it. I'm going to look at it. It's like, oh, jeez. Okay. I got to go to Staples. I'll be back with more paper in a minute.
One of my favorite things about the show that you just touched on, Phil, is that it forces the viewer to watch. Slight tangent, I promise it has a point. I don't know if you guys have seen the Mr. Rogers documentary, but Mr. Rogers talks a lot about creating shows for children and how important it is to engage a quiet space for them. He talks a lot how, a lot of action cartoons, especially if we're looking at shows like Power Rangers or other things where it's mostly the action is the driving force, whereas here it's sort of Jack's heart is the driving force. There's aspects of revenge. There's obviously a ton of really dope fights, but it's not the central element of the show. And I think that because of that, when you have these quiet spaces, that when those voices come in, it makes you pay attention so much more. There's so much more impact on what words are being used because they use so few. And I was wondering how that, if it did affect your guys' performance at all, knowing that, you don't have like a lot of lines to explain things. Things are explained very simply in just a few kind of short, quick dialogue moments. Did that at all impact your performance?
Well, actually, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because I remember when Gendy first was pitching the show, like, the reason he said he did it was, every cartoon I ever watched never had enough action for me. But the action, you're right, is not the reason for the story. And part of his mastery is he put a ton of action in the show, but he realized it doesn't mean anything if it's not, grounded in a feeling, in a reason, in a character. Like I said, being able to see it early on and know what kind of action, what kind of show is going on, you realize, like, oh, it's not about dialogue, A lot of the humor is not there until 9 months later, and it's funny because from recording, the sessions we record to what you see on air, completely different, just because there's a lot of, most animation scripts, you read the whole, dialogue script, the whole story.
Yeah.
The end of the last episode of season 5, what happens in the end is not in the dialogue script. There's no dialogue. I didn't know what was happening. Till we came in for the idea.
I will say, I really like the ending of the season. Some people have issues. I think it's Gendy's show, and I thought it was sad. It was sad.
Of course.
But it did have that little glimpse of hope at the very, very end. Although I also would say the ladybug is also red and black, and it's not whose color, so you never know, who it was. At last I have you, samurai.
You're on my finger. I could crush you like a bug.
No, you would. Curse you.
Is there an episode you guys are particularly proud of? Something where you guys feel like you excelled?
Is there one I'm not?
For me, I think I grow into Aku. The scene with the psychiatrist, I've never liked. It was the first time where I got to speak a lot. I didn't speak very much in the first episode, and I never liked it. I don't like listening to myself do it. I was like, oh my God, Baldwin, you suck. Oh, you're gonna get so fired. But I think it's by the time we start to get into the second to last episode, I actually do like it. I can listen to myself and I can go, okay. That's Aku. I buy that I'm Aku now, and I'm not Greg Baldwin, pretending to be Aku. So yeah, I would say those last 2 episodes I'm particularly fond of. That's sad as it is.
See, now that's funny, because I look at that, the psychiatrist scene, and I feel like this is where Greg put his mark on the character.
I was just scared.
Because it was a side of Aku and a performance of the character that we had never seen before.
Yeah, that is true.
You were in virgin territory, and I didn't know it was scary.
It was
because that's hard. Because I did a show years ago, Ozzy and Drix, where I had taken over for Chris Rock, and there's a weirdness when you start as a voice match, because everybody in the room thinks they know what you should sound like when you speak. Like, oh, I know, everybody knows Mako.
You know how you want me to sound, all right.
So you always feel like you're being second guessed, like every choice you make. Like when you create the character, everybody assumes that what you do is right.
Yes, exactly.
But when it's somebody else, but inevitably, what happens is, like with Ozzy and Drix, we got to a point where they started writing stuff that Chris Rock never did. And so, you would do like a scene where Ozzy is sad, and people go, let's try it again. It doesn't really sound like him. It's like, that's because he doesn't do that. I mean, if in fact, had it still been Chris Rock doing it, he probably would have said, you know what? Why don't we just make this funny instead of sad? And they would rewrite it because he's a huge star.
So, talk to me a little bit about, I want to talk about your voice acting careers, because both of you have been working for so long, you have just bank loads of characters to go off of. And I was wondering, I've talked to a lot of different voice actors, and a lot of them say that they started as children, just making funny voices at the TV. Did you guys kind of start the same way, experimenting with voice acting, or did it come along later in your careers?
for me, I always wanted to be an actor, but I think what really drew me to acting and voice acting in particular, and in an odd way served me well, I, from a very early age, fell in love with my mother's musical albums, Camelot, My Fair Lady, Fiddler on the Roof, and I really got into musical theater. I still love musical theater. I would listen to these albums again and again and again. I'm talking 9, 10 years old. And so eventually, I've listened to it. I can sound like Henry Higgins. Oh, look, I can do this. Oh, it can be a Cockney. By literally just listening to the albums over and over again, it helped me with learning dialects, with learning to do different voices, with learning just the business of acting. And indeed, it was that thread, musical theater, which led me to be here. There was a musical written in 1977 by Stephen Sondheim. It was called Pacific Overtures. Mako Iwamatsu starred in it. He was up for a Tony Award. I think my mom and dad gave me the album for my birthday, and I loved this album. It was a musical like nothing I'd ever heard before. It's completely kabuki style. It's not boy meets girl. It's about geopolitical things. It's about America is not painted in a particularly good light in the way that it treats Japan. And I was like blown away by this. So I literally, I could do it now. I could sing the whole score for you now if you wanted to hear it. Upon the floating kingdom. But bottom line is, 30 years later, I probably was the only person on earth who had been doing an impression of Mako for 30 years. And so you never, I love it because you literally, something as random as that, you never know. I actually, Sondheim is I think 80, and another great actor that influenced me, Albert Finney, passed away. And I told my wife, I wish that I had just sent him a letter saying, thank you, I saw you in Scrooge, it set me upon a different path in my life. And she said, well, you should write Stephen Sondheim, Greg. And so I did. I just wrote him. You did this. You wrote Pacific Overtures. As a result of this, my life and my family's life has been changed. Thank you, Mr. Sondheim. You have no idea what you did, but you did it. And I just wanted to get it out into the universe so that he doesn't leave this world without me letting him know. He wrote me back. I know. He said, I knew it was him because it was on a note card and it said, I'm glad to hear that Pacific Overtures had such a salubrious effect on your career. And I said, he said salubrious. That's Sondheim, baby. Nobody's going to say salubrious with Stephen Sondheim.
Wow.
So, yeah, you never know.
That's an incredible story.
Right?
Phil, how about you? When were you starting to find your voice acting talent?
Well, I don't know. That's sort of a weird thing because when I was growing up, voice acting wasn't a thing. Just wasn't. That term didn't exist. I mean, there were people doing it, but it was the stuff Mel Blanc does.
Exactly.
You know? I would say it's like before Bill Gates, tech billionaire wasn't a job description. It was just like him. Now there's hundreds of them. Tech billionaires, it's a thing. And now voice acting is a thing. But I always had an ear for voices. And I would, play with a tape recorder for hours, which, people nowadays can't even imagine. But for me, when I began to pursue acting, doing voices or doing cartoons was just one of many, many kinds of jobs I would love to have. Whether it's acting on a mic, acting on a stage, acting in front of a camera, send it my way, I'll take it. But oddly, after spending several years pursuing on-camera stuff, after I left Mad TV, I started pursuing, by then voice acting was a thing, and I got a voice agent and actively put energy towards it, and it turned out to be, something I was really, suited for, and basically, became the bulk of my career.
Audience, I'm going to ask 2 more questions and turn it over to you guys for Q&A, so start thinking about what you want to ask. So one of the things I've been noticing a lot lately is a lot of celebrities getting hired to basically do their own voice for a character, and I've heard different things from the animation community about it. Some people are like, it's a voice and it's totally fine, and then some people are like, I own 60 voices so I can come in and do hours of work. And us not getting leads in major motion pictures it's frustrating because we have the talent and we're there. And I was wondering how you guys feel about it. Is it acting just a blank slate and whoever they cast is who they cast? Are you comfortable with that, or do you think that there should be, specific spaces for people who train to be voice actors who are knowledgeable on how to do multiple voices?
I mean, I don't know. I hear the same things, and honestly, I think anybody who's got a big problem with it probably has a lot of other much bigger problems.
Okay.
It's like, why are they making decisions based on marketing and what money they think? How dare they?
I can't believe Disney would do such a thing.
Exactly. It's like, apparently you just, when it fell into ice before Jaws came out, and don't realize what, modern media is about. Because that's what it is. I mean, the early animated features, all that Disney stuff, there's no stars.
No, you got, as recently as Beauty and the Beast, like David Ogden Stiers and Angela Lansbury are probably the biggest stars in it.
Right.
But then Robin Williams comes along with Aladdin, and that's the game changer. But who else would be the genie except Robin Williams? Who else would have voiced that? Mel Gibson didn't need to voice John Smith, but I understand why he did,
Well, it's that thing that happens a lot in Hollywood. Something like, Aladdin comes along, Robin Williams, and the thing's a huge hit, and executives, 90% of the time, will learn the wrong lesson.
Yes.
Instead of learning, ooh, let's hire people like Robin Williams who can bring life to a character, like, stars! We need more stars! But the thing is, there are some people who bring a great performance, Chris Rock. Anything you say in this voice suddenly becomes 50% funnier. You don't cast him for, a deep drama, but, if you cast him in Madagascar, it helps, But then they go too far, and it's like, oh, you cast Roseanne in an animated feature? Really?
They did too.
They did. Nobody wants to hear her voice for 90 minutes. Brad Pitt. Ain't nobody ever paid no money to hear Brad Pitt. It's like, ooh, I want Brad Pitt, but I don't want to see him. Said no one ever.
The same could be said for Angelina, who plays a tiger.
Right,
that's
Here
right.
we are.
And nobody in the world ever knew it was her.
So last question for you guys. You're both a part of a bunch of really huge fandoms. Star Wars, Avatar, all the supers. And I was wondering, what's it like to interact with those fans, and are Samurai Jack fans different in any way? Do you feel a responsibility? 'Cause I don't know, especially now that we got like these legacy things. Is there any kind of responsibility that you feel as an actor, or you're like, I did my job in the booth, and if you liked it, super swell, and if not, that's fine, or are you trying to interact? Are you trying to engage in those fandoms?
Well, I think every fandom is different, because each show is different, and each show is giving you something different. There's a lot of crossover. There are a lot of people who watch Futurama who also watch Samurai Jack. But, as far as like the deep, people who are like live and breathe it, that's, they're all separate. As far as responsibility, that's tough. I feel like, as a voice actor, I'm kind of the front man of the band. I'm Mick Jagger standing up there going, I didn't actually write all the songs. Because we have a sort of an oversized responsibility, because, there's hundreds of other people, because like I said, animation is so collaborative that, there's so many artists, there's so many writers, just everybody is part of what makes it special. The experience that you're having, the show that you love, the characters that really, live in your heart are created by several hundred people, not us, but we're the name next to the character name. So that, to me, is a responsibility. And I've realized over the years that, even if I don't think, some other show, was that great, if somebody else loved it, it came along at a time where it was really special to them, you have to honor that. It's like, it's not about my experience of making it, it's about your experience of taking it in.
I find Iroh has surprised me a little bit. I always knew that Iroh was a very well-written character, and the words were beautiful. But it wasn't until I started coming to these cons when I realized this character had an impact. People will come up and they'll say, wow, I wrote it for my girlfriend in high school, and Iroh said this, and time after time, I realized that this Iroh is a father figure in many ways. And it really hit me home one day. I get a DM on Twitter. And they say, you know what, I'm sorry, Mr. Baldwin, I don't mean to bother you, but you know, Uncle Iro says such wise things, and maybe you can help me because my father passed away last night. And I'm going, wow, that's way above my pay grade. But I will try. So, you know, Google wise things Iro says about loss. And that to me has been a surprise that this character means so much. And I do sometimes try to remember them. For example, on Twitter, would Iro tweet this, Greg? Maybe you need to do that. You know, it is because he's so beloved. It is, I think, contingent upon me as much as I can. There's the meme that says, be the person you think Uncle Iro thinks you are. And that even applies to me, where I have to literally, you know, pull it back and try to be this kind, wise person as best I can, you know.
I think for angry teens who are constantly lashing out, and Iroh is just a steady force, just there, just pouring out love. Oh God, I love that character so much. Okay, I'm not gonna take up any more of the audience's time. Guys, Q&A questions. Who's go? I saw your hand go up first, sir.
This is for Greg. Well, one of our favorite episodes is Iroh's Day, with everyone has individual.
Tales of Bossing Say.
Yeah, the Tales of Bossing Say. That is my favorite episode because that's where I actually hear where
it's the first time you hear my voice. They do a pickup, and it's just a couple of lines with the earthbending kids.
Yeah, the playing soccer earthbending. I love it.
And you can if it's just my standalone episode and I'm not next to Mako, it's a close enough match. But in that episode where it's me here and then it's Mako in the next scene, to me it's like, holy moly, Greg! You sound nothing like Mako.
My friends didn't even notice.
That's good.
The first time, they
Believe
did
me,
not
I
even
did.
notice.
I absolutely did.
For me, since I'm a very keen with voice acting, I heard it, but I did not pay attention because it's actually, you still had a spirit of when you were saying to the kids about being there and staying there and all that.
I think he tells them to run.
Then run.
To admit
And then
mistakes. And I think that's it. And that thing goes, run!
And it was a very emotional scene for me, so it's just that whole episode.
It's a beautiful episode.
Yes.
People will ask me to, and you know, I'm an actor, I'll do anything you ask me to. But I will not sing Leaves from the Vine, because to me, I feel like I would be disrespecting Mako. That is the moment so many people remember from that show, myself included. And no, that's his song. I'm not going to ever sing that song.
Yes, sir.
Question for Phil. You had mentioned that Gendy had reduced the number of grunts and impact noises. What is his reasoning for that, and have you seen that philosophy spread to other shows?
No, it was a character choice. This guy is so well trained, it's not an effort for him to jump and flip and slash a beetle bot in half. You know, for a regular guy and for people who don't really think about where the action of a character is coming from, they just want to fill the space, you know? Because a lot of shows, action is equated with noise, you know? And if it's quiet, they don't feel like it sounds active enough. And Gendy, I think, proved that to be completely false, you know? And I think by taking out grunts, he added weight to sounds, you know? It's like now you're not having someone go, yeah! You're hearing the blade go through the metal, you know? And that is, to me, a different experience. That's action where you feel it rather than just see it.
Yeah, for Phil, I was Joelle when I was like 10 or 11. And I went to a take cartoons that are kind of juvenile, idiotic, dimwit characters, and I don't like that, with no storytelling. I wanted to thank you for all the wonderful memories I have when I was a kid.
Well, thank you for watching the good ones.
Yeah, okay.
Because there were crappy ones too.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Let me see. This question is for Phil. How do you get the role for Virtual Hawkins in Static Shock?
Static Shock. it's, I feel bad, because people ask questions like that. How did you get that role? As if there's a really interesting story, and there isn't. I got that role the same way I didn't get 900 other roles. I auditioned, and they listened to the audition and said, that sounds like what we want. And then they hired me. But then there are other times where I audition, they listen to me, nah, and they hire someone else. So, it's two stories, one of them has a happy ending for me.
Other questions? Yeah.
Two-part for both of you. What advice would you give to people who aspire to be voice actors? And then what advice would you give to actors, you know, who already have the job and improving themselves or whatever?
I say, if you want to be a voice actor, be an actor. That's the most important part of it. You can do impressions and funny voices, but at the end of the day, you need to be an actor, which means you need to always keep working on, I hate to say your craft, but it is a craft. You know, it sounds pretentious, but it actually is. Just to keep working, to work, you know, to do theater, to do commercials, to do anything you can. Take classes, take improv classes, very, very helpful for voice acting. And dialects are helpful, very. And learn to do impressions too. That's helpful. But the main thing is just be the best actor you can be.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the term voice acting is a misnomer because it's the acting that comes first. The voice is completely secondary. As we were saying before, like a lot of times they'll hire somebody because they can do a voice, but it turns out they can't play the character. And then the whole cartoon suffers. As far as what you're saying about somebody who's in it, I look at acting as problem solving. Every time you're handed a script, that's a problem. This is a piece of paper, I have to make it an experience. Along with, you know, my other collaborators. If it's on camera, then it's you, the lighting person, the camera person. If it's animation, it's you, the animators. You know, the problem to solve is what do I have to do to move my part of this along? And every role is a new problem to solve. What I found is over the years, the people who are seasoned don't have any special skills that other people don't. They can just get there a little faster. I remember being on set with Pulp Fiction, this is 1994, and watching Samuel L. Jackson, you know, do things that I could not figure out how. I mean, he was acting. We'd all seen great acting before, but watching it in person, and he did it instantly, it seemed. He was sitting there drinking his coffee, talking about golf or whatever, and they said, all right, we're ready to go. And with no effort whatsoever, all of a sudden I looked up and I'm looking into someone else's eyes, you know? And to me, that became like, okay, he knows how to do that in an instant. I mean, now. I'm sure there was a point where
He had to learn it himself.
Right, he had to do all sorts of mammy, mama, you know, all that sort of stuff. But I said, okay, that's my goal, is to try to become more efficient at problem solving.
I've heard Morgan Freeman can fall asleep on set, they'll call action, and he's just ready to go.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Incredible. Any other questions, guys?
This is for both of you. What was the first jobs you guys had where you woke up in the morning and felt like this is success, like I feel successful, or have you felt that yet at all?
You got an answer?
Well, I know, it amazes me that I'm sitting up here with Phil LaMarr, so, you know, that's, you know, in terms of, yeah, you know, it was cool. When I got the call for iRobot, it was certainly cool, but, you know, it's continually, you're trying to get more jobs. The business of an actor, 90% of it is just trying to find the next job. So, yeah, I don't think I've ever, you know, I don't wake up, oh, it's wonderful to be me. I'm going to take a treasure bath now. It's not like that.
No, actually, it's funny you say that, because honestly, the work, to me, of being an actor, is trying to get work. The actual jobs are the reward.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
You know? But yeah, unfortunately, I learned early on, it's a moving target. And I think actually the job, like the job I got, you know, where the hearing of it, you know, made me the happiest was probably in 1991. I got hired to do a guest spot on a Red Fox sitcom called The Royal Family. Not a great show, but it was Red Fox and Della Reese, and getting that job qualified me for my health insurance.
That's success.
So that, yeah, exactly. In a very small, but very concrete way,
Yes.
that felt like success. But definitely not the high point of a career.
And for many years, even when I was recording, I had a regular job. I worked for the Walt Disney Company as a paralegal. I did screen credits. I basically spelled names for a living. Which is usually, it's a pretty chill job until you misspell the wrong person's name. Then it's not so chill.
That's so funny. You know, Wayne Allwine, who was the voice of Mickey Mouse for 25, 30 years, had the same thing. He started out in the sound department and, you know, took over for his boss who had been doing the Mickey voice and was doing his job and being Mickey Mouse.
It was cool. I was able to adapt, you know, in some ways it was the best. I didn't have to worry about my next paycheck because I had a paycheck coming. And the beauty of voice acting too is I don't have to go be on set for 15 hours a day. I can record my auditions via email, and if I book the gig miraculously, it's going to be an hour and a half, 2 hours tops. So, yeah, I liked it. I liked having a day job. I like not having a day job too. It's all good.
It's time for one final question. I'm not calling you because you haven't asked one yet.
Phil, do you still hate dogs?
What? I don't hate dogs. What are you talking about? In reference to a line I'm supposed to know from one of my characters. Wait, this isn't a character I do.
It is now.
It is now. What are you talking about, woman? No, seriously, explain what you're talking about. Is this more internet lies? Like, no, yesterday somebody posted something that said it was my birthday. I had people wishing me a happy birthday. Like, no. Right?
Okay.
I think it was at WonderCon.
At WonderCon?
Were you at WonderCon, or was it the last LA Comic Con? I don't know.
I love dogs.
No, you said you hated them.
Go ahead, sir.
Actually, this is a request for Greg and Phil. If you guys could maybe do a dialogue of Aku and Samurai Jack, where they say, I forgot the episode, it's when Jack goes into the peaceful village and they teach him how to jump. And they teach him how to jump high, and the last part, which cracks me up to this very day, where he says, Aku's like, "You could fly?" He says, "No, jump good."
All right, you want? Are you ready?
Yeah, ready.
You can fly!
No, jump good.
Now let's switch. You can walk through it all the
What? You can fly? No, jump good.
Wow. Guys, give it up for Greg Baldwin and Phil LaMarr. All that appreciate it.
No, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Sure. Cool. Just in case you have a for us, stand there. Okay?